right, welcome everyone, and I'm very excited to be here again. Today, I'm going to share with you why I left Islam, and it's kind of related with my life story, of course, and the things that I've been through, and with my family, of course, with my mom and sister. And it's a long story, and I never had a chance to really go deep into it with people. I have this short version of my testimony, how I ended up believing in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. But yeah, since I have this platform right now, I thought, why not just giving more information, and I can go deeper into my reasons why I left Islam, and maybe that can bless you as well. Or if you're not a believer, it might open your eyes. And everything that I'm going to tell you is really lifetime experiences that I had with my mom and sister, mostly. And in the area that I grew up, like, they were really practicing Islam, and they were really committed to the text of the Quran and also the traditions there. So yeah, these are the testimonies of an eyewitness who grew up in that society, who had both Sunni and Shia denomination in front of his eyes. And I happen to be that person. So anyway, nowadays, usually people have this claim that, okay, you can keep your belief, you can keep your faith, and I can keep mine. Well, that's true, but at some point, our faith really affects each other, and it affects the world around us. And for instance, like, if I don't like some certain stuff, you cannot do it in front of me, like, so that certainly affects you as well. And or maybe I have some practices, I need to do some stuff, and you have to respect me, because when it comes to the matter of faith, people cannot question you, and they have to step back. Here we get into this issue, like, as a Muslim, how much your faith and your worldview will affect others. And that's pretty serious stuff, and we're going to talk about all of that. And as I mentioned before in the previous podcast with Jonathan, I grew up in a Muslim family. My father is a Sunni and my mother is a Shia, and they both were really committed into their faith, even though, like, Sunni and Shia, they cannot come along. But how they got married, that's a whole another story. Maybe I get into that. But yeah, somehow they got married, and they had so much differences. And you could see that how much the faith that they had would separate them from each other, even though they would claim they were worshiping one God. But all the practices and traditions and their worldview was different, and their lifestyle was different as well. So let me start with my mother's side and how they were exactly. So the environment that I was watching as a kid from the Shia side, which was my mom, like, my grandfather was our hero because he died in a battle between Iran and Iraq. So there was a time after the revolution, Saddam Hussein decided to attack Iran and take one of the provinces, and he claimed that province to be for Iraq, and originally belonged to Iraq. So he claimed that he will take it, but it took him 8 years, and eventually he gave up. And we know what happened to Saddam Hussein eventually. But thousands of people died, including my grandfather. So story of my grandfather was that one time they were praying, they were in a prayer, and some of the enemies, they come to their tents, and all other soldiers, they start to run away, but my grandfather stays in prayer. He's not willing to break his prayer and run away. And him and another two of his companions, they stay praying. And the commander of the enemy, he comes in front of him and he says, "Hey, break your prayer." But he refuses, and he goes to continuing his prayer. And eventually he shoots him in the head. And there was photos of him, and after that, the soldiers, the survivors, they were all telling this story about my grandfather, and he was really our hero. So I was growing up in my family, and I remember that listening and retelling this story of my grandfather, how he was passionate about God, and he was fearless. He was like continuing the prayer, And based on Shia belief, they believe that one of the Imams, the first Imam of Shia, he died in the same way. So for us, it was like glorious death, you know? Like we were always talking about my grandfather's death. I was even talking to the other kids on the street. I was like, yeah, you know how my grandfather died. He refused to break his prayer, and this is how he died for his faith. You know, I come from that family, and it was such an honor to share this with other kids around me. Therefore, after his death, all his sons, they also wanted to be like him. They wanted to honor the name of their father because one of the streets were under my grandfather's name, because, you know, like the news were everywhere. Everywhere were talking about it. And like I heard that hundreds of people showed up in his funeral. It was such a glorious and honorable way of dying. So his sons always wanted to commit themselves in Islam, especially into Shia. And my aunts also, they were the same way. They were always like practicing these Shia practices, mourning for the Imams, which is a very big deal. Like in Shia belief system, like Imams are very important because like they believe that their bloodline comes from Muhammad directly, so they are the rightful one, the righteous ones. And all the imams, all 12 imams actually are holy. There are shrines inside of Iran, and one shrine is for Imam Riza, and he's the eighth imam who got buried in my city in Mashhad. So my grandmother's house, my grandmother and grandfather house was very close to the shrine, and that was also another honor. So imagine people from other cities and provinces of Iran, they usually come to my city to buy some souvenirs because they believe that it brings blessings and it has blessings in it. So people would go there into the shrine, touch the doors, the gates to just receive blessings. They like put money inside, like thousands of dollars every day, goes to Sharine's bank account, which we still don't know where it goes exactly, but this is how it looks when it comes to imam. So they are very important in Shia belief, and they pray to the imams actually to receive blessings and healings, and for them there's no problem in that. And when you accuse them for idolatry, they defend it. They say they're holy, they're already with God, so we communicate with them, and this is how they defend themselves. They usually say that we're not actually praying to them, but they're our mediator. But in fact, I've seen that a lot. Like Muslims, Shia Muslims, directly pray to the imams. So I don't know. That's a questionable thing. Imagine like my mother's side, they were like really this passionate, and they just wanted to honor God and my grandfather and to glorify his name after his death. So even though the next generation, which was us as his grandson, we weren't that committed, but I still have a lot of cousins that they still love imams and they still practice all of those beliefs. And I actually have another cousin who is a mullah. So he went to the school like for 5 6 years. He got degrees, and he's actually a mullah right now, and he's very passionate in his faith. But from my father's side, like culturally, they were so different, and they came from a Sunni background. And at first, my mom's relatives, they didn't want them to get married, but again, that's whole another story. But eventually that happened somehow. So from the Sunni side, they are very proud for being a Muslim, so they don't consider Shia as a Muslim. They say that they misguided and they're interpreting and they're adding to the Quran. So especially back then, I'm talking about like 25 years ago, like as far as I can remember, they hated each other. They really hated each other. So when I was like 2 3 years old, my father, because of his job, he was in the military, he had to move to other province. Therefore, he decided to go to his own province, which was a Sunni Muslim area. So from the very beginning of my childhood, I think I was 6 years old, we moved there. I can't remember that time, but I remember when I was 7, I started to go to school. So I went there and I always felt like a foreigner because like those people, they have totally different culture. Even their look is different. Their uh, customs are different. Their religion is different. So you could see they have whole different worldview. And I see it with my own eyes, like how much faith can shape your lifestyle and your worldview and even your behavior. So I started going to school, and because, I loved my mom more, I decided to become a Shia. So I just said that, hey, you know what? I'm a Shia. I went there as a Shia in a school, and like the majority of the school, they all were Sunni, and they were so proud. They were so proud, and they were like 95% Sunnis, and they were 5% Shia, and I was one of them. So we always had these arguments, and even as a kid, we had no idea, but they were mocking us. And even as a kid, they were good apologetics, like they could question your faith, they could like mock your imams, and I was trying to just defend my faith. I was like, hey, no, Abu Bakr had this problem and stuff, but they were pretty good at it. So from the Sunni Muslim side, they believe that after Muhammad's death, there were like four caliphs or four successors. So the first one was Abu Bakr, one of the very early companions of Muhammad, and he was very faithful to him. And the second one was Umar, and the third one was Usman, and the fourth was Ali. But back in that time, there was some group of people, they started to like Ali, and they thought that he's the rightful successor after Usman. But somehow Usman ends up being a caliph, and Ali misses that position and he cannot get it. Ali describes that moment. He was like, I saw Uthman getting that position, and it was very difficult for me. It was very sad for me. So he describes his emotion toward that event. And from then on, like Shia and Sunni starts and they separate each other. Right now in the world, 85% of Muslims are Sunni, and 15% are Shia, actually. So from the very beginning of Islam, like Shia was very suppressed, and they always wanted to have their lands, but like they were less in number. They didn't have that much allies, so they were always remain minority. But Sunni was growing and growing, and it was growing very fast actually. On that time, it went to Egypt, it went to Asia. So Islam was growing very fast, and therefore, as a kid, I was always familiar, and it was kind of my lifestyle, to hide myself as a Shia, because also in my appearance, I was different than others. The people there, they are mostly like darker skin tone, and I could see the difference, the way they were looking at me, and I always hated the way looking at me, especially the older men. And I always used to just hold my mom's hand. I couldn't hold my father's hand because he would accuse me that you're a coward, and you should be a man. But I never felt safe, so I was always around my mother. That's why I loved her actually, because she was kind of my shield and my refuge. So yeah, this is how the life was there. Therefore, when I turned like 12, 13, I was able to ask some questions, like I just had those questions in my head, but I just has asked some questions about God, about these imams. Who are they? Who's right? I mean, like Sunni or Shia, which one eventually? Because I knew that in my heart there is only one truth, and one of these should be true. Like there's not either way, because I could see how different they are and how much they hate each other, they fight each other, and I knew that even throughout history there was so much battles going on, and I really wanted to know the truth, but I never dared to ask those questions from anyone, because especially on that Muslim area, don't you dare to ask God or question God. And anything you would ask that was difficult to answer, they would say, hey, we don't know, Allahu alam, like only God knows, we don't know those stuff, and you better not to question, because questions leads you to misguidance. So don't ask these kind of questions. But yet, I've been always curious in life. I used to just ask so much questions about anything, about science, about geography, about other cultures. I always has had these questions, and I was very good in school. Actually, my grades were very high, and I used to receive a lot of prizes each year. My mom was always proud of me, and that's a very very good memory that that I still have from my childhood, because I could see my mom's face. She was so proud, and she was sharing it with others. And like in an honor and shame culture, like when you get an achievement, you just show off, like you talk about it with everyone. And from the opposite side, when you're struggling, when something is not working in your life, you just push it down and you hide it. You never tell anyone about it. So one part of not questioning was because of the shame and honor culture. Like I didn't want everyone to think that I'm getting far away from God, so that might bring shame on my mom, and I didn't want that happen. So therefore, I always kept those questions in my heart. But yeah, eventually, like I shared this part in the previous podcast. When I was like 18 and 19, I finally found a book, and I just wanted to know more about the history of Islam. And as I mentioned in the previous podcast, you know the story back there. And yeah, I just realized that Islam was all about swords, and I was just checking the authentic sources. It wasn't like I'm checking something that is invented by Christians or Jews or atheists to attack Islam. No, um, it was actually under Hadith. And if you don't know what Hadith is the Muslim traditions, all Muhammad sayings, or at some point it gives you context about some verses, how it got revealed, or some companions of Muhammad, they're sharing something that they saw Muhammad is doing or telling. So this is what Hadith is, and I was just checking those. You should notice that modern Muslims, especially these days, they're very like soft. But back then, Muslims were proud of all the battles that Muhammad did and all the people that he killed, and they were just sharing those stuff as an honor, as in glory. They were like, yes, this is our prophet. But right now, Muslims are so different. They try to hide these facts, but I saw it with my own eyes. Like 20 years ago, like Muslims were okay with all these facts. They were like, yeah, this happens. All those that Muhammad killed them, like they deserve to die because they were disbelievers and they were pagans. So why not? And even from the Shia side, they're also very proud of Ali, and they believe that he's such a hero, and he was always beside Muhammad, and he was like one of the main leaders in his battles, as Shia claims. I think Sunni doesn't believe so. They don't focus on Ali that much. He wasn't that much important figure in Sunni side, but for Shia, he's everything in a way that he considers to be holy, sinless. So anyway, I get this book and I start to read it, and I just wanted to know what happened, how we became a Muslim. I knew Iran wasn't a Muslim country from the beginnings. I really wanted to know what happened and how did we become a Muslim. So when I was a kid, I used to hear this story over and over from my teachers, from people around me, that hey, the message of Islam was so beautiful and peaceful, so that Iran's army, they just dropped their weapons and they surrounded themselves. They led the army in and they accepted Islam and they came to Iran peacefully. And this is the story that I knew. And I was very pleased with that story from the beginning. And also I remember like my families, my relatives, especially one of my uncles who was very, very committed to Shia Islam. He also said that, yeah, this is what happened. Like, this is the power of Islam. This is the message. And this is how he was like emphasizing Islam, and he was defending his faith. But for me, something was missing there, because I knew that like Iran, Persia actually had the greatest army back then. And they were in battle actually with Rome. So imagine like two of the greatest empires existing at that time. They would keep fighting with each other, and on that time Islam wasn't that great, and their territory was small still. And to me it didn't make sense. Like, I knew Cyrus, I knew Darius, I knew that they were great kings. They had the strongest army and they had so many territories. So for me, something was missing. And I knew that like Persians and Arab, they really hated each other. They never liked each other. And even in Iran's history is written that like Saudi Arabia didn't have anything. That's why Cyrus never conquered it, because it was only deserts, you know. So there was no advantage of uh, occupying or conquering that area. So they were busy with more important stuff. So for Iran, like for Persians, Arabs and Arab community was never important. So that's why I started to ask questions like how on earth we became Muslim. So I found this book and I started to read it, and the title was Two Centuries of Silence, and that was a very thick book. So the author, he collected many informations throughout like years and years, and he came up with this book. And he just wrote down all of these historical facts that happened. And I realized that during Muhammad's time, he writes a letter to the king of Persia, and he invites him to Islam, and he threats him, like, if you don't accept Islam, we will attack you, which was a very offensive act to do. So that's why the king of Persia, he tears the letter, and he kind of ignores that, because again, they were struggling with some battles with Romans, and at the same time they had some inner issues inside of Iran, because like it was a very large territory, so different people from different areas, they claimed to be king. So the king of Persia had to manage all of these issues that was happening back then. And after Muhammad's death, the second successor, Umar, he marched the army toward Persia. And I realized that, like, reading this book, like 5 major battles happened between Persia and like Arabs. And Iranians actually refused, and they were just going back and forth, so many minor battles as well. But eventually, like, Persian army marches into Arabia, and they cannot fight in sand. But Arabs were very skilled in sand because they were living there and they knew how to fight. And Persian army couldn't survive there because of the storms and also the elephants that they had. They couldn't like function well in the desert. So eventually, like after 5 major battles, the whole empire of Persia collapsed and Arabs entered the country. And at first they just like tried to convert people, and they were burning all the libraries, all the books, and because they believed that, hey, you only need one book, which is Quran, and you don't need any other book. And that's why they just burned everything. And I was reading all this horrible stuff that they've done. Like they were raping women, they were killing everyone, they were beheading the men especially. And the question was like, hey, you submit yourself to Allah, otherwise you will be die. And back then, like, many people refused to do so, because like there was another religion in Iran, like Zoroastrian, and they were very proud of their religion. They had their own temple, and they really didn't want to submit themselves into this, foreign religion. So even nowadays, there are many Persians, Zoroastrians, they flee into India because of that wars, and they're still practicing their own faith. They all refuse to convert to Islam. So I keep reading, and I couldn't believe that. I was like, that version that I've been told by my loved ones, the people that I trusted so much, I felt so heartbroken, and I felt like I've been betrayed for my whole life. Like all the joy that I have, all this pride that I have for my faith, it was all based on a lie. Like Islam came through sword into Iran. Therefore, after that, after reading this book, I was just a whole new window like opened up to me. I was like, wow. So you cannot trust everything that you've been taught from your childhood, even from your parents. Doesn't mean that they're evil, but they might be ignorant. Maybe they're just passing the whatever they've been taught to you as the next generation. But I was like, again, I was very like rebellious and curious. I was like, I don't want to pass this knowledge into the next generation, maybe. So yeah, I at first I was like, okay, like wars and battles happens all around the world, but I never dared to question Muhammad or the text of the Quran and Islam itself. I was like, okay, this was a battle, let's just deal with it. But at the same time, another side of me wanted to know more about Muhammad. Who is Muhammad? Therefore, like on that time, I had an application actually on my phone, and it was Quran in Farsi and in Farsi and Arabic. But I wanted to know the interpretations. I just didn't want to follow the traditions and all the prayers in Arabic, because after reading that book, the hatred toward Arab really grew into my heart, and I really didn't want to ever speak in Arabic, even though I have been taught Arabic in a school, and that was mandatory to have Arabic as one of our lessons. Therefore, I can read and I can write, but I cannot like fully understand it. Therefore, I just wanted to follow the meanings and just wanted to know what is this about. If this religion has such a power, like in our lifestyle and worldview, I need to know what it is exactly. Therefore, I was just reading this, and one of the passages in the Quran that came to me, like even back then, it was chapter 424, when it talks about the captives that you take as a Muslim in a battle, and there are women as well there. So what you're going to do with those women, like what is the law about them? And in the text of the Quran, it says, married women are forbidden for you except for the ones that are your captive in the battle. So the word captives, they kind of use this term right hand possessed, which means that they're your property. Like since you defeated them in the battle, they are your property. This is not about a defensive battle. This is about like battle in general. You might start the battle, but hey, at the end, this is your reward. Like you're a soldier, you got this land. Now it's time for you to enjoy. So I just read this verse, and it was horrible. It was like you can have sex with a married woman, and it's lawful. It's part of the text of the Quran. So I was like, what's happening exactly? So from then on, I realized that, you know what? I can question Quran. Why not? So I went into the internet, and I was just checking these facts and stuff. So I realized that there are some other people like me, like they have these ideas. They also mentioned this chapter, like this specific verse, like 424. So I realized that this is not only me. Like there are some other people who are questioning even Quran. So I was like, if they can do that, why not me? Like I can question anything. So from here on, my journey starts. So I go deeper into the text of the Quran, and also asking people questions. But like my teachers, and especially my mom, like they really didn't know that much. And the teachers, some of them they knew, and they were really proud. Actually, they were like, "Yeah, this is the reward for the soldiers." But it's interesting that as I'm growing up and I'm being like, I'm seeing kind of like two generations in here. The new generations, they don't defend it, they just deny it. You're misinterpreting the text. But back then there was no issue. Like they were saying, they were defending it. They were like, yeah, there were the rewards, there's no problem in it, and it's lawful. They were marrying them, so that was the excuse and justification for that. But nowadays, even the Muslims know something is wrong with this laws and commands in Quran, but they're just denying it. So I have so much difficult time to talk to a Muslim or debate with them because they just keep denying it, even though the text is clearly says what it says, but they don't want to face the fact. So, and the other verse that was really got my attention was chapter 47, verse 4, when Allah is talking to Muhammad and says, like, slay the disbelievers, like, wherever you see them. And I was like, this is totally makes sense. Like, I cannot reject this because I know what happened through history to the country of Iran. So those people might get their ideas from somewhere. Therefore, I was just keep asking more questions. I was going deeper and deeper, and I just found these verses and facts about Muhammad, that he married a 6-year-old baby and she had her dolls with her according to their own authentic sources. And when she turned 9, he consummated marriage with her, and she was only 9 years old. I'm just reading all of that. And there's another verse, like, uh, according to the Muslim tradition, he had like 11 wives. I was like, everything that I saw as a child, like, now everything makes sense. Because back in that province in Iran, like in the south of Iran, southeast, I saw some men, they had like 4 wives, and I saw it with my own eyes. And those wives' job was to only provide to the guy, and he was doing nothing. And he had like 10, 12 kids. They were just playing around, and all 4 wives, they were there as well, but they hated each other, and especially they hated the youngest one, because she was the one that the man was spending the most time with her. And it was totally normal back then. So now everything is making sense. I can see that how much these people are committed to the text of Quran, and it really, really shapes their lifestyle. And I saw it with my own eyes. Like, there was a man like more than 30, 35 years old, and he had a child bride. Like, the lady was only 12, 13 years old. And you could see in her face, I can't, even as a kid, I saw her, like, she wasn't happy. She was like, I could see that she was wounded, and she was full of hatred. She always thought that people trying to hurt her. She always wanted to hurt someone. That's the attitude that she had. But I couldn't blame her now, because now I get it. Like, what kind of kid wants to be with a 35 years old man, to share a bed with? And especially in the modern science, like, it's proven that it's very damaging for a kid to have sexual relationship, because they're not mentally prepared and not physically prepared, and that brings so much damage. That again light up this question into my mind, with the fact that Muhammad cannot be the pattern or an example for the old time, because that's the thing that I've been taught as a kid. They said that Muhammad was so righteous and good, and he's a perfect example for the present day. But right now, I'm old enough, I'm mature enough to see the difference, to see the effect. So I could just remember, I still can remember that kid's face, and how she felt disgusted, and she had to serve us. And something that they had in their culture back then, that women wasn't allowed to join the guests. So they would cook and put the food for you, and they had to just disappear, to hide, because it wouldn't consider good for someone's wife to be around you. That was kind of shameful. Therefore, people on that province, on that area especially, they were hiding their wives. And so basically you couldn't see them, you couldn't say more than hi, like you couldn't say even how are you. It was like only hi. So everything that I'm sharing with you, it's for like 20 years ago. And right now things might be different, and since the society is developing very fast and changing. But back then, this is what exactly it was. So I go deeper in the text of the Quran, and I see that this verse, Muhammad marries his own daughter-in-law, and her name was Zainab, and Muhammad kind of likes her. and eventually he married with his own daughter-in-law. So people start to questioning him, and they were whispering around. So therefore, for other Muslims to not practice this, he abolished the adoption. I mean, like, how evil is this? Like, you abolished a whole beautiful law to just get your own desire to sleep with a beautiful woman. And even right now, like in Islamic countries, they cannot adopt a children. Of course, they can have an orphan in the house, but the orphan will always remain orphan, will always feel like an orphan. And I've seen with my own eyes, I had some friends there and they were orphans actually. And I could see that like they were different. They didn't want to talk much and they were always aggressive. They wanted to fight with everyone because people were mocking them. People were calling them bastards. People were putting names on it. They would calling them fatherless, motherless. And imagine a kid growing up with all of those humiliations. And I was witness, like I saw almost 99% of the orphans that I knew in Islamic country, they were turning to criminals like drug dealers, or just, becoming smugglers from, especially in the borders between Afghanistan and Iran. And they were just doing all kind of stuff because they were the most rejected people. And all of this, I was thinking, like, all of this, now that I go back, it goes somewhere. Like, it goes to this very verse of Quran that Muhammad abolished the adoption. And now there are like thousands of kids. They have to grow up in a Muslim society and face all this trauma and grow up with it. That was pure evil. That is pure evil. And right now, these days, like, Muslims try to justify that. They say that, oh, an orphan is welcomed into a house. Yeah, that is true, but they never will be treated the same as the biological kid. That will never happen. And they cannot even have the equal inherit. That will never happen in Islamic countries. So imagine, like, just because of someone having lost after a woman, like, now centuries and centuries after, all these kids have to grow up under that condition. So I realized that faith is not something that you keep it and I keep it. That really affects the whole society. This is not a joke. While I was in the middle of these researches and stuff, my mom and father, they couldn't get along because my father was beating my mom the whole time, and I was watching them, and I was too little. I was growing up watching my mom getting beaten by my father like multiple times for no reasons. And one of the reasons was that my mom was very beautiful, and she is very beautiful. And imagine, on that society, the Islamic society, shame is very strong, it's very powerful. And to be a beautiful woman, it's very tough on that strict Islamic society. So all other women, they hated my mom. And my father never liked it because other women, they thought that my mom is strumbling for their husbands, so therefore she should hide herself. But imagine, like, my mom is coming from a different culture, and she's very joyful, she's very happy, but she had to hide herself. So I saw it my whole life, like how much my mom should be under the pressure, and she has to defend herself all the time because, like, people coming to my father sharing false stories about my mom, and he was just beating her, and I couldn't do anything. I was just a kid, I was just watching them. And with anything that he had in his hand, he was just beating my mom. And I also felt awkward about myself. I was like, I'm a man, I really need to be able to defend my mom, but I couldn't. I was too weak, I was too small. Therefore, I started that hatred toward myself also. I felt like I'm useless. I can't do anything for my mom. Like, I have to be there for her. So I on that time I didn't know what to do. I was just making myself busy with my toys, with just going outside to not see all of that. But even while I was playing, I knew that like I'm not sure if my mom can survive this one, because I could see how my father was beating her. You might say that okay, it's because of your father and stuff, but hey, let's go back. Of course that's evil, but let's go back. Imagine you coming from this mindset that woman is your property, and woman is half of a man, and according to the Quran even, women inherit half of a man. So unconsciously you have this idea that you're less than me, like I can do anything that I want to you. And I saw it with my own eyes, like in my family and even around among those Muslims. It was very common to beat their wives because Quran allows that actually. So if you go to the text of the Quran, it permits the husbands to beat their wives, and it's very clear, it's written there. But it's interesting that in the modern Quran they just translate that word different. They translated, instead of beat them, they translated it into discipline them gently. But guess what? There is no word gently in the original text, and discipline has been changed with beat, because the word verb is wasrabahunna, and that means to strike, to beat. That's very clear. It comes from the root word zaraba, which is to hit. And you can ask any Arab actually, and we have that as well. Like in Farsi, we use it in a different way, but we know what that means. And when I just read these modern Qurans, I'm very surprised like how they're changing the interpretation of their Quran, because they also know that it's embarrassing, and even the modern society cannot accept that. And they had to change the meaning, otherwise people would read it and just stop reading this evil book. And also I was watching these like young girls that their parents, they were like planning for the marriage, and they were telling them, hey, you're going to marry this guy, you're going to marry this guy. And they were just the kids. Let them to be a kid. Like they don't need to think about marriage. They're too young for that. And you're just entering her to a whole different season that she's not ready to enter to. You have no idea how much trauma and damage you bring into their lives. And I also realized that that's also normal in Quran, having sex with minors. Like it's written in chapter 65 verse 4. It says, as for your woman past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know, their waiting period is 3 months. And those who have not menstruate as well, as for those who are pregnant, their waiting periods end with delivery. So imagine like in this passage, we have 3 categories, like women past the age of menstruation. The second category is that the ones that who have not menstruated yet. The third is the ones who are pregnant. So imagine like it gives permission to marry a minor even though she's not menstruated yet. I mean, how wicked is this? Right now people come up with all these justifications. Oh, it was normal back then and all of that. But guess what? If you're saying that Muhammad and Islam is a perfect religion for all time, all human being, well, this verse is expired. Like you cannot defend it. But even now, there are some Muslims who are bold enough to defend child marriage because they have to defend their prophet. I always question them on social media. I am involved in many debates, and I always tell them, if he's an example for all time, do you defend child marriage in the present day? And they just run away. Some of them, they're just denying the very clear passage in front of them. They're just denying it. And I feel like it's because many people, they cannot speak Arabic and they just read the interpretations and they think that, well, that's normal, and they never question the original text. But guess what? In chapter 65:4 that I just read for you, even with the modern translation, it's very clear, but yet some people keep denying it. But when you look at the history of Islam, the life of Muhammad, you can see that they were practicing all of that. So this is not something new, or we didn't come up with this idea to attack Muslims. I saw it with my own eyes, and it's in their book. Therefore, I think when I was 18, 19, my mom and dad decided to my mom wanted to get divorced from my father because he was a psycho. Like, he was really a psycho. He had two different characters. Uh, Outside of the house, he was different. Inside, he was full of anger for no reason, because he was addicted as well. So his behavior had so much up and downs. And there was time that he used to wake up 3 a.m. and beat my mom just because we didn't have food at that time. And we all had to wake up, panic, what's happening? And I could see my mom screaming. And again, I couldn't do anything. So I had to just put the pillow on my head and push it so that I cannot hear it, so that I can get sleep. But yeah, and eventually my mom was courageous enough. When I was 18, she just told me, hey, I want to get divorced. And I was like, yeah, I will support you in that, because I knew how much she's suffering. But guess what? Again, in Islamic law, you need your husband's permission to get divorced. Otherwise, you cannot. So, and also, since my father was part of military, he knew all the polices there, and all the judges. So basically, we had no voice. And we are in this small town. Everybody knows my father. They all respect him because they see his character outside of the house. So we had no proof. We couldn't prove that, hey, this man has problem. He's a psycho. He's crazy. He keeps beating my mom. But he was so nice outside that nobody could believe that. They could accuse us for being a liar. Therefore, one day my mom was like, you know what? I made my decision. I just want to run away from the house. Are you with me or not? And yeah, since I really loved my mom and I knew she deserved a better life, I said, yeah, I will follow you. Therefore, that's also a whole another story. But yeah, one day when my father was out, we run away from the house, and we rent a house in a very isolated area. And my mom was covering her face, and I used to wear cap the whole time so that no one can recognize me. And the news spread so fast because, again, hey, shame and honor culture, that was such a disgrace for my mom's side. And imagine, like, all those people were passionate on trying to honor uh, their dead father. Their sister has decided to get divorced, and not only that, she ran away from the house. So that was a big shame. And they would keep calling us, they were begging us, hey, come back home, this will embarrass us. But they had no idea about our story. Like, we didn't know where to start, we didn't know how to tell them. So even my mom said that, like, we don't have time to explain this stuff, I'm just losing my mind. Therefore, when my father arrived home and he didn't find us there, he came up with this story. He told everyone that my mom had a boyfriend and we stole money from the house. And he told all the polices, and he told all the relatives. So imagine, like, all this hatred toward us. They all just wanted to put us down because they were looking at my mom like as a prostitute. Like, imagine, divorce by itself, especially back then, was so shameful. And right now, not only that, they keep hearing about this boyfriend thing and this money stolen. And we couldn't even look back to explain anything. You know, like, we're gone. We don't know where to start. So we just got a house, and we rent a house, and we just start from the scratch. Like, we had no furniture in the house. We didn't have a pillow even to put under our head. Like, nothing. But I knew that I'm doing the right thing. My mom is doing the right thing, because especially um on that province, the Sunni province, it was so tough for us to live there. We never belonged there. I could see that I don't belong into this mess. like people having multiple wives and child marriage and beating wives, all the crimes, and watching orphans. I was like, I can't fit there. Like, this is not my lifestyle. Like, especially back then, I was like, I'm out. I wasn't a believer. I was like, "Man, I don't want to be part of this mess." And my mom thought the same thing. So again, if we go back to Islam, women cannot get divorced, and they need their husband's permission for that. And women cannot have insurance. They cannot have their passport because their husband should give this permission. So imagine, like, we start this new life. My mom doesn't have any insurance. Like, her insurance got expired, and we couldn't do anything. And my father, for 10 years, he refused to sign a paper because he knew the Islamic law. He knew if he signed the paper, my mom can get her passport, her insurance, and we can have a way better life. But he refused to do so. And what he was using again? He was using the Islamic law. So of course I was blaming him, but in my mind I knew that he's following a specific law and rule. So I mean, next time, if you think of faith as being something personal, no, it really affects others. It really shapes a society. It shapes worldview. So it's not as simple as you think. So we just started that life. We had this tiny apartment. I wanted to go to school, but deep in heart, I was very happy because we came to a bigger city now, and I was excited. And that city is Mashhad. Actually, it was a way bigger city. There's so much more to do, especially as a teenage, and I loved it. But at the same time, we had to hide ourselves because still our relatives and the police was looking after us. Therefore, for 1 year, we just had a secret life. And my uncles, they threat us. They said that if you run out of money, you cannot knock our doors. Like, we won't give you anything, because it was already shameful for them. And again, I'm talking about like 20 years ago. And back then, divorce wasn't this much accepted and common. And yeah, they all said that you should not put any hope on us. We won't help you in any matter. So yeah, you're just by yourself. So I could see my mom, like, she was working from morning to the late night, having 3 different jobs. So when my grandmother died, their property was supposed to distribute it among their kids, and my mom was one of that. And on that time, we thought of, oh, that can be a huge help for us. And guess what? Like, in Islamic law, again, like, women have half of inheritance than man. So my mom received half of the money compared to my uncle. So imagine, like, we were in need, like, desperately, but yet men can receive more. And my uncles, they all had their lives. They all had house, a car already, and yet my mom have to receive half. And you might say, okay, that's only a law of a country. So guess what? No, actually, that is also written in the Quran. A woman receive half of inheritance compared to man. This is exactly the text of the Quran. So all the things, like, people in the world, like, especially in the Islamic countries, they are facing, usually, like, Islam defenders, they just blame governments and stuff. No, actually, these are written in their book. This is not something people made up. This is written in their book. And this is the fact that people should really know about. And especially for Westerners and people who don't speak Arabic and they cannot read Arabic, like, the original text of Quran says all of this. And even about this half inherit, it's even in the English interpretation, it says so. Like, you can see so many injustice toward women. And I can relate into that, and I can understand this because I was at the woman's side. I was with my mom. So as a man, many people might say that, oh, how can you notice this difference? You're not a woman, you're not a girl. But guess what? I was on that side with my mom the whole time. And even I can remember we were going to these courts, and the judges, they wouldn't even talk to my mom. They were always listening to my father, and they didn't want to look at her because, again, divorce back then was such a big deal. They were looking at her as someone who's, just the one to have her life, and she doesn't want to be obedient to her husband. They were all looking at it like that. And we had no proof. We couldn't prove that my father is a psycho. So he had a louder voice because he was a man. That's it. So years passes by, and my mom is working, I'm working, and at the same time I was going to university, but I was just trying to be a help. And me and my mom, we were just focusing for a good life for my sister. At least we didn't want her to experience anything bad, even though she was with us the whole time. But after that, our focus, at least my focus, was that to make a good environment for her, because I knew that how painful is this, how difficult is this. So I go to society, and I find some friends. Right now I'm in a Shia area, and there's a very evil practice in Shia as well. So they call it the temporary marriage, actually. And it's very well accepted among all the Shia scholars, and they all defend it. And what is it exactly? So basically, you can like a woman and offer her a certain amount of money, and you can just ask a mullah, someone who is qualified as a imam or something, and they can just read a verse for you, and it's lawful for you to sleep with the person. And that's a very common practice, especially back then, and especially among the more religious Shia. They all accept this, and they don't consider it as fornication. They defend it, and even in their official website, the Shia website, there are articles about temporary marriage. They defend it, and it's out there. Like, people are still practicing it. And some Islam defenders, they say that, oh, it was never ever practiced. These mullahs and these new generations brought this into Islam. But guess what? It's not like this. It's not like this. Something has to have a beginning, right? So I did some research on that as well, and actually I found a hadith in the Sunni sources, in fact, and in Sahih Muslim. So Sahih Muslim is a book, very authentic, one of the most authentic Islamic sources. And anything that Muhammad said, Muhammad taught, anything that Muslims believe comes from these authentic books, and Sahih Muslim is one of those. So Sahih Muslim is a collection of books, and each book is collections of the events and sayings of Muhammad. So in the book of Al-Nikah, hadith number 1404, it says, "We were on an expedition with Allah's messenger." So one of the companion of Muhammad, he's narrating this event. "And we had no woman with us. We said, should we not have ourselves castrated? He, the Holy Prophet, forbade us to do so. Then he granted us permission that we should contract temporary marriage for a short period, giving her a garment." And Abdullah then recited this verse. So notice in here, like, there are two companions with Muhammad, and Muhammad is with them. So they think that, oh, Prophet forbade us to do so. So it was a very common practice, and Muhammad was forbidding this. But guess what? What happens in here? He allows these two companions to practice it. So again, as this person says, he granted us permission that we could contract temporary marriage for a short time. So basically, they like someone, and they did so. They practiced this temporary marriage. And this is not the only hadith. There are like 2 or 3 other hadiths about that as well. And there is another one after a battle, like they are companions of Muhammad, and they ask him, hey, can we have a temporary marriage? And Muhammad allows this. And notice what this Abdullah is reciting to justify this evil act. He says, those who believe do not make unlawful the good things which Allah has made lawful for you, and do not transgress. Allah does not like transgressors. So can you see this evil? Like, I don't know what to call it. If you're a Muslim and you got offended, I'm sorry, I'm not attacking you as a person, but just listen. Look what you believe. This is your prophet, like allowing this practice. And in fact, if you go to the history of Islam, like during Muhammad, it was allowed. Muhammad forbids it. And during the Abu Bakr and Umar, it continues going on, but Ali abolished it. But guess what? Even in the modern days, they're still practicing it. So that was a common thing. And Muhammad gives permission. I saw that among my friends. Like, they had temporary wives, and they used to just like someone and have this and go to a house, because like in Islamic countries, it's not lawful to do this kind of stuff and go to a house with a girl. But guess what? If it's under a temporary marriage, it's okay. So you can see like the beautiful concept of marriage, how it's being twisted by evil himself, and people are believing it, and they just practicing it. And it's very common. And even the new generations, they also feel disgusted about this temporary marriage. Even the Muslims one, even the Shia ones. But they don't know the history behind it. They think that all these mullahs, they come up with this new idea. But they have no idea their prophet himself, he gave permission for other Muslims to do so. And as we know that Muhammad had multiple wives, I mean, who knows? He also had those as well. Why not? Therefore, and I don't know, I was like 20 or something, that with all the knowledge that I had, all the things that I experienced, and the knowledge that I had from Quran, I was like, this cannot be God. This doesn't come from God. The God that I know in my heart, I have a good feelings toward him. It should not be this, and this is all man-made. It's obvious that a man, from his point of view, put all these laws. And even in the Quran, there are so much promises for the believers when they go to paradise. So imagine, like in Islam, alcohol is forbidden, sex is forbidden. But guess what? In heaven, you can get all of this. You can get plenty of this. The rivers full of wine, and you can have virgins there provided for you. And there are different hadiths that they come up with different numbers. Some says 72 virgins, some says there's less, some says if you're very committed Muslim, they're like it goes up to 500 as well. So imagine like all the things that are forbidden in here, all of a sudden those can be lawful in their paradise. So when you talk to a Muslim about this stuff, they all come up with the justifications. They were like, oh, that's different kind of wine. But if you look into the original text of Quran, it doesn't say that there's different type of wine. Even for the scholars were confusing, like if it's forbidden, why it's there? And they come up with this solution and justification. Oh, that's different kind of wine. But it doesn't make sense. Something is bad, it should be bad, especially in the presence of God. We're talking about the pure holiness of God. Like you can have sex with these virgins in heaven, and they call this hurs. And it's mentioned multiple times in their book, and their hadith covering those, and those are filthy. Like it describes that the orgasm of a man lasts for years in heaven, and they can just experience all of those joys and stuff. So imagine, like, I was thinking how this can be possible, and no one had any answer for this. And of course, no one can have. They can only come up with justifications and excuses to cover up the fact, even though the text is in front of them. Therefore, what could I conclude out of this? So imagine Muhammad was in a desert, like women are all covered. So for him to describe heaven, it should be somewhere green, somewhere that is has vineyard, as it described in Quran, with rivers full of honey and milk and wine, and there are women, and all women, they describe their skin to be white. It's very obvious that it's out of the man's mind who was wishing for such a world. So he was describing all of those for people who are following him. Okay, if you follow me and follow my God, you can get all this stuff in heaven. So for me, I really concluded that this cannot be God. Like, there's something wrong with it. I might bring shame into my family by leaving Islam, but I'd rather to do so. I don't want to blindly follow something that it doesn't make sense and I can't understand it even. Like, all the prayers are in Arabic, the language that I don't speak even. Like, you have to do certain stuff before you stand in the presence of God. God will always be your master and you're always a slave, and you try to please him, always please him. But guess what? We all are human and we all make mistakes, and there is no guarantee. Even if you stand in the presence of Allah as a Muslim, there is no guarantee. No Muslim have this guarantee to after death they will end up in heaven. That's why funeral and death is such a scary thing in Islam and among Muslims. And especially the way that it described hell in Quran. There are several passages dedicated to describe the hell, and one of it is this: Allah takes a disbeliever and puts him into the fire, and when he burns, he brings him out of the fire, gives him a new skin, and he puts him back into the fire so that he can taste the real punishment. So imagine, like, this God apparently enjoys torturing people. So you can see the logic in here. By putting fear, these false promises, they just want people to follow them, to follow Muhammad, so that he can get more army and conquer more places. And that's it. And by those fear, like, people don't dare to disobey him because they think that they might end up burning in hell. And also there's another law for apostates. If you leave Islam, you should be killed. This is in their hadith, and it's authentic hadith, and that's a very common knowledge among Muslims. Like, all of them knows that apostasy equals death. And I feel like that's also another main reason that many people in Islamic country, they don't want to denounce Islam, because hey, shame and everything aside, we're dealing with death. You're dealing with losing your life. So that's also another thing that hinders people to stay away from Islam. And also, as the last point, like, we all know about the hatred toward Jewish by Muslims, and they just hate Jews. And I remember even as a kid, Jew was our curse word. Like, we were cursing each other in school, and we were calling each other Jew because that would be offensive, and kids would get offended, like, very seriously. And I always wondered where this hatred is coming from. But guess what? It's also in their tradition. It's again Sahih al-Bukhari, another book of Muslims, which is very authentic, book 54, hadith 524. It is reported by Abu Huraira. The Prophet said, "A clan of children of Israel was lost. No person knows what they acted. However, I do not see them except that they were cursed by Allah and transfigured into rats. Because if you put the milk of a she-camel in front of a rat, it would not drink it. But if you put it in front of the milk of a sheep, it will drink it." So can you see this evil and the hatred toward the nation? Like it says, Allah turns them into rat. And what's the logic in here? So Muhammad says, since a rat doesn't drink a she camel milk, it shows that the rat is a Jew. Like, can you see this? Can you follow up with this logic? And there are plenty of hadiths regarding to Jews. Like Muhammad really had a problem with Jews because Jews had dignity, they had their own religion, they had their books, and they had their own holy places, and Arabs didn't have that. So there was always this hatred toward Jews, and there was many battles with the Jews and killing all the Jews in different areas. So you can see even this hatred toward Jews, it started from somewhere and it just keep passing by through the generations. So again, when it comes to faith, it really matters. This is something that shapes your worldview, the way you see others, the way you see the world, the way you see God, the way you act actually and behave, and it shapes your lifestyle. So yeah, and it was around that time when I was like 20, 21, I decided to denounce Islam. And I was like, no matter what happened, what consequences it will be, I will never consider myself a Muslim. And yeah, here I am now today, saved by blood of Jesus, and I'm very grateful for that. But how I became a believer, I think I shared a summary of it in the previous podcast with Jonathan. But if you haven't listened to it, you can go there. And we shared our reasons why we should follow Christ. And I think it's a powerful testimony by both of us, how God saved us from, totally different backgrounds, from different part of earth, and we love each other. So yeah, that was my story. And thanks for listening to all of that. I have more other sources regarding to Islam and the contradictions in the Quran, and even getting deeper into Muhammad's life and his character, and to see even can we call him a prophet or not. And yeah, in the next episodes, I try to come up with some materials, good materials, to show you what the actual text of Quran says about Christians, about God, what is the worldview about God. So yeah, in future I try to come back and start with some critics about Islam. So thank you so much for listening. God bless you all, and see you next time.